Okay.
Wait. Bismillah. Here we are again after almost a year with Kayvan Yahyai, and we want to basically do the part two of the Hidden Shariati. How are you doing, Kayvan?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Yes. Well, I mean, we've been meaning to do this for about a year now.
Yes.
So we want to talk tonight about the final days of Dr. Shariati and also his legacy, and the fact that his legacy has been somewhat lied about by certain actors.
As a matter of fact, Wahid, I talked to his sons, to his daughters, Susan Khanum and Sarah Khanum. Both of them a PhD in sociology, teaching at Tehran University. And even I spoke lengthy, to doctors lately deceased, the late Dr. Paran Shariat Rezavi, For example, the gist of their expressions was, if I may say so, they usually told me I know absolutely nothing about this stuff, and the problems of Aboriginal Islam. Indeed, she said, I know so little that in hindsight, actually, I assumed something wrong with this Islam because they were all wiped out, by the Bab himself. In fact, there are thousands of people alive today who can testify on that, that the ancestry, goes back to Ustad Muhammad Taghi Shariati, who took off a turban and has struggled with many problems all through his life, one of which is that their very existence was frequently in danger, Even if you personally belong to a disadvantaged group, according to Dr. Susan Shariati, Dr. Shariati's daughter, and therefore have a deep first-hand understanding of its viewpoint, that does not mean you understand the viewpoint of all other such groups, For each group and subgroup faces a different maze of glass ceiling, double standards, coded insults, and institutional discrimination. But that was not the case with the Bābī Bayanis. A 30-year-old handsome guy, has 30 years experience of what it means to be a hidden Bayani.
Yeah.
But the thing is, he also knows, and he has also experience of what it means to be, a Bayani. A Bayani.
Well, first of all, the children of...
Let me put the
Sure.
And he grew up, according to his daughter, this hidden Bayani was repeatedly stopped and searched by the secret police, by the thought police, Gedankpolizei.
Of which regime? Of the Shah or the mullahs?
The mullahs and the Shahs both, The mullahs and the Shahs both. Something that even Chinese lesbian never had to undergo.
So she said, let me stop you. So she said that they actually came searching their house for evidence of Bayani related material?
Oh, yes, exactly. Yes, most definitely.
And did they take anything away from them?
Well, he was scrupulous. He was very scrupulous, both Ustad Muhammad Taghi Shariati, and for instance, on one occasion, even because the current supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was a very close friend of the family.
Yes.
Actually, the only cleric who tied a knot with the families, and stayed friends, for so long. even after Dr. Shariati was martyred, Ayatollah Khamenei was the first, he was the only and the first cleric, who went to Ustad Muhammad Taqi Shariati's house. He goes to his place, started crying, reciting verses from the Quran and prayers from the Aimma, and extending his sincere condolences, and was really sincere, according to the testimony of people attending the ceremony, and actually Ustad Taqi Shariati whipped a little bit. He sobbed and said, "What are you doing, Ayatollah Khamenei? What are you doing? What is going on? Are you telling me that my son is dead, right?" And they just hugged, they just shrugged. However, except for Ayatollah Khamenei, all the clerics of Mashhad and Tehran, frowned upon both father and sons.
Boycotted them completely. And most important of all, yes, they searched for some evidence that could potentially link them to the Bayani cause. However, according to Susan, for instance, I was talking about Ustad Shariati. His son, Dr. Shariati, recalled an event. He said, "My mother used to sing aloud. Used to sing a song, used to sing something, a prayer. Anyway, he said, I cannot remember what she was singing back then. However, whatever she was singing, my grandpa, Ustad Muhammad Taqi Shariati, suddenly said, Susan Khanum, please break it off. She said, what's wrong, Granny? Grandpa, what's wrong? What is wrong? He said, please, just do not sing. Stay away and do not sing. Ayatollah Khamenei is about, to drop by and visit me. Please stop it. And he said, I'm still confused. What she was singing, what she was, reciting. That Ustad Muhammad Shariati urgently asked him to, stop it, to bring it off. And Dr. Hassan Shariati, a 12-year-old curious son, said, I was taken aback because my grandpa, never anything whatsoever against women singing. Okay, and it was, and he said, indeed, it was our house, none of anybody's business, least of all Mr. Khamenei. But for some reason, he begged, Puran Khanum, please stop it. And it was not, he said, it was not quite clear if my mother was reciting something from the Bayani prayers or something, that my grandfather took it really swiftly to stop it, as if nothing has happened. And he said, Puran Khanum, never spoke a word of it, please. That's interesting, isn't it? That's interesting, but that kind of memory is not the kind of direct evidence that we're looking for that we know exists from the family side.
They were very scrupulous,
Yeah, of course they were very scrupulous. They had to be, but just remember that most Bayani parents in that generation kept their own beliefs and allegiances secret and hidden from their own children. And in that particular period, with that generation that came out of the Constitutional Revolution, which was the generation of Muhammad Taqi Shariati, he would have exercised taqiyya for many different reasons, especially because he was living in a hyper-religious city like Mashhad, and
his own ancestry.
Also, there was a pragmatic reason in that those who practiced taqiyya could mobilize politically much better than those who didn't.
However, right now we have access to some more straightforward and direct evidence to link, Muhammad Taqi Shariati and the son because of bayan. For instance, people try to undermine the validity of Muhammad Ali Sepanlu's, memoirs. You remember Muhammad Ali Sepanlu's memoirs?
Yeah.
When,
yes.
Tried, can you recap it in a sense?
You know the story better than I do. You recap.
And what you remember?
That these were reminiscence of by this individual of his time with Ali Shariati during the late 1960s and early 1970s, and there was a particular bit in there about the manner in which Dr. Ali Shariati prayed, which was not the regular form of prayer of any Muslim of any denomination. That this was basically the seated zikr, which is the form of dua and salat that the bayanis implement.
And we know that after the ascension of Sophie Azal, if you take a look at the picture, there's a famous picture, taken by a French, I believe, by a French individual, and some grand dervish, a reverend dervish, is reciting the Pure Rosary, over the Sopazal's burial, ceremony, and the Grand Dervish, definitely a Muslim, right? Definitely a Muslim.
It was amongst the Naqshbandi and the Qadri dervishes of Cyprus, yes.
But they just recited Pure Rosary, and that was it, not completely the Islamic form or in the normal Islamic form as we.
No, they would have recited the Fatiha.
They would have recited the Fatiha, right? Exactly. Like is customary of the time. Then and now it's again very. But the thing is, what we should notice is that according to Susan Shariati, the Chinese lesbian, as an example, was not born into a lesbian family, probably in a lesbian neighborhood, and maybe had nobody in the world to teach her key lessons. So is the case with a Bayani. Hence growing up, Bayani, in Mashhad wholly makes it easy to understand the struggle of growing up a Bayani, haphazardly. In previous era, this mattered less, but because you were, sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, but now, if you made an effort to sympathize, with your less fortunate neighbors, for instance, because as you know, the Bayani call non-Bayani is less fortunate. That was usually enough. But today, major debates about things such as, for instance, climate change, artificial intelligence, have an impact on everybody, whether in Mashhad or in Hong Kong or Baltimore or New York. So we need to take into account all viewpoints. Yet, how can anyone do that? How can anyone understand the web of relations between thousands of, individuals across the Iran of the time? It was downsize or deny. I wonder.
I don't understand what you mean. Can you be more specific?
I was telling that even if we truly want to, most of us are no longer capable of understanding the major problems of the Bayani community.
At the time,
yes.
Well, I mean, we know from word of mouth from these families who were alive at the time what these problems were. But, I mean, occasionally you have somebody who wrote a personal diary or personal chronicle. There's a few odds and ends from the late 1940s and early 1950s, and also a few from the period immediately after the 1953 coup d'etat that are actually on the Women's World in Raja Iran page by some of the members of the Dr Ali family. But the thing is that the children of Ali Shariati are not completely in the know, and that's fine, because they were children at the time, and also their father and their grandfather were engaged in very dangerous at the time, and even still, political activity against both the regime and the clergy. However, the evidence, the implicit evidence of the belief of Ali Shariati himself is very much evident throughout his works, even though he camouflages it. But somebody who knows the Bayani works well, who goes through the corpus of his writings and lectures in the original form, not in the translations are very misleading, quickly detects where some of the strands and threads of his thought are coming from. Now, we have known that this was the case with Dr. Ali Shariati. We have known that this is the case with his father. That the more explicit evidence comes from the testimony of many of the ulama themselves at the time. And I find it very interesting, and I've mentioned this before, and I've mentioned this also in the podcast I did with Salman Sheikh, that there is a conspiracy of silence amongst the ulama today, whether in the Hawza or in the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, to be quiet and to conceal Dr. Ali Shariati and his father's true beliefs. Even though during the 1970s and even in the late 1960s, one of the bones of contentions that the more reactionary mullahs of the time had with the Shariati family was precisely the accusation that they themselves were making against the Shariati family, that these were Bābīs, Azali Bābīs. Furthermore, we have the testimony of Abdulkarim Surush's own psychiatrist, where Mr. Abdulkarim Surush had confessed this fact to his own psychiatrist about the Bābī affiliation of Azali Bābī affiliation of Dr. Ali Shariati. So there's another layer of this conspiracy of silence now with these so-called liberal and reformist Islamists of the caliber of Abdulkarim Surush and all their various hangers-on, that they don't want to reveal this extremely explosive element to the biography of Dr. Ali Shariati. Because
as far as Surush is concerned, are you suggesting that Surush and Kamal Kharazi attended, washing his body, the ghusl, so-called, as they call it, ghusl?
I am. First of all, let's come back. First of all, Abdulkarim Surush was not a personal friend of Dr. Ali Shariati.
No,
we are not even aware if Dr. Abdulkarim Surush had even attended any of the sessions of the Hosseiniya Irshad.
No.
Okay. So exactly who was Dr. Ali? Who was Abdulkarim Surush to Dr. Ali Shariati? Nobody. So then this whole entire story of Dr. Abdulkarim Surush going all the way to Southampton to be personally present to administer to the corpse of Dr. Ali Shariati makes very little sense unless Mr. Abdulkarim Surush was a government agent either of the British or a Sabak agent acting in that capacity, because he was not next of kin. He was not a friend. Hold on. He was not next of kin. He was not family. He was not a friend. He was not an acquaintance. He was not even an admirer of Dr. Ali Shariati. So what was he doing in the morgue in Southampton?
Exactly. That's what I'm asking. I was telling you that, let alone his suspicious breaking in to the morgue. He was not a doctor.
And he wasn't even a doctor. Exactly. He was.
So
and he was not.
How could he manage to break into the morgue?
So either one of two things. Either this entire story about how Dr. Surush ended up at the morgue in Southampton is completely made up, that he made this entire story up, him and Kharazi, or he was acting in the capacity of some kind of a agent, which at the time would put him basically in the orbit of Savak, Abdulkarim Soroush.
It does, you know, and the level of morbidity, you know, he recounts that, well, my recollection, as far as I remember, goes like this, that, well, we see some reluctance, obvious reluctance out of the clerics' side, and therefore it was encumbrance on us, you know, to go over there, bring herself, you know, to the morgue and, you know, administer most and other Islamic rituals. You know,
Well, I mean, just stop. You know, this is the question: who were these people to Dr. Ali Shariati?
nobody, none, as you said.
This is the issue that nobody has interrogated in the conversations that they have had with Abdulkarim Soroush over the years, over his memory of those events. Dr. Abdulkarim Soroush was a nobody to Dr. Ali Shariati. Again, he was not a family member, next of kin. He was not an administering doctor. He was not an acquaintance. He was not a close friend. Moreover, he was neither a family member, acquaintance, or close kin to the people that Dr. Ali Shariati had been staying with. So in effect, Mr. Abdulkarim Soroush was just like any other person from the street, right, at the time. So then how is it that Mr. Abdulkarim Soroush suddenly ends up in the morgue of the Southampton Hospital and becomes a mover and shaker?
Well, another particular aspect of his recollection that doesn't add up is, well, you and I both lived in England, right? We lived in, you know, America, England, you know, English language speaking, you know, countries around the world. He said, because I was a PhD student, on my card, you know, Dr. Abdulkarim Soroush, as my title, you know, was carved and printed, you know. So the security guard mistook it, you know, with a, you know, physician. But we know that, no, that is not the case.
This is nonsense. He didn't have a PhD.
He didn't have a PhD even.
So how could he even have a card with a doctor put on it?
Exactly, and even he had completed the studies. We know that, you know, usually a card issued to a doctor, to a physician, the title goes with MD, right?
Yes.
The title goes with MD, not doctor.
Not doctor.
And that's and the security guards, you know, they were English, right?
Yes.
However illiterate they are, you know, they could, you know, instantaneously, you know, detect something is off with this guy. You know, Dr. Abdulkarim Soroush made no sense. Okay, anybody could, you know, obtain a doctorate degree, but it is only the MD, and they have particular form of card, right? They have particular form of card. For instance, this guy is an MD working on the hospital, you know, with his specialty, expertise, you know, stuff like that. But Soroush said, my card was very simple. Just written Chelsea College of University College London, Dr. Abdulkarim Soroush, and a date down below, which is odd. I've never come across such a card. You know, identity cards are usually more thorough, you know, in order to be misused, you know, in order not to be misused, in order not to be taken advantage of. And as you agree, everywhere around the world, in English-speaking countries, you know, usually doctors, physicians are referred to as MD. You know,
yes,
I've never seen even a single physician without MD title. You know, without any title, you know, that prefix his or her name, right? And I don't still get, and Vahid, you know how manipulative this guy is. Nobody, no single individual, among the audience has questioned his recollection, has challenged his recollection.
Because of his reputation. Because of his reputation.
So it's appeal to reputation, right? A fallacy.
Well, which is a fallacy, but yet, there are. I know people who have actually questioned this entire narrative about that Soroush has put out there over the years about his recollection of the post-mortem of Dr. Ali Shariati, because I've talked to a few of these people over the years.
And
okay?
sorry, Wahid, even suppose he conjured up something, he conjured up his, smuggling. Even he smuggled through the morgue. Suppose, the door was open and he just walked in. We know that in the morgue, there are other peoples.
Yes.
He couldn't be left alone. There were other physicians, nurses who might have easily detected that this guy is a foreigner. This guy doesn't belong to this hospital, or even this guy is not a doctor. He was studying philosophy. And
he was also too young.
Too young, yes, too young. And that's a question. Too young to be a relative of doctor, too young to be a friend of doctors, definitely no next of kin. And the thing is, he was not alone. He said, I brought in Kamal Kharrazi and another one as well. So how could it happen? How did it come to pass? Three individuals with no affiliations whatsoever to NHS, for instance, or any other medical institution can, break into the morgue without being detected, without being questioned. That's ridiculous. And
without a proper badge, without proper identification, without proper introduction.
No identification, not even a white cover. Not even a white cover.
So, and not even a white cover. So there are only two options to the narrative and the account of Abdulkarim Soroush about the post-mortem of Ali Shariati and his part in it. Either he is lying, and he's made the story, and he's made the whole thing up. Either he's lying, or he was an agent of a foreign government, or an agent of Savak itself.
That's right. Yes, that's.
There is no other option, because this story of Abdulkarim Soroush is so full of holes.
Exactly.
Right? About what he was doing there. What was he doing there? You are not a next of kin. You're not a close friend. You weren't even a student of Shariati's, nor did Shariati probably even know about you.
And it's 24-year-old. He was 24.
Was he 24 or 34? I mean, because sometimes he says that he's born in 1945. And other times we read that he was born in 1955. So there's also questions. So there's questions about when Soroush himself was actually originally born.
Yes, that's true. And the thing is, we know that even in Southampton, Muslims were living back then. There were Muslims, there were clerics. There was a mosque even in Southampton. Could have administered, the Islamic rituals, and we didn't even know. And I'm wondering, if you ever read Dr. Ali Sharat's Will and Testament,
Mm-hmm.
In his Will and Testament, he spoke no word of Islamic rituals to be administered to his corp, and even his pilgrimage, during his pilgrimage, some of the clerics, most important of all, above and beyond, Ayatollah Mutahari,
Mm-hmm.
Ayatollah Mutahari, according to him, he saw many red flags, that Dr. Shariati doesn't submit to the Islamic rituals. You know, he pretended to be very introvert, but he said as if he just, you know, came along uh, just to see where the primal point actually, you know, settled for a while, you know. And remember, just shortly before the pilgrimage, you know, he wrote one of his magnum opus called Fatima is Fatima, you know.
Mhm. That's
The
part of the
title is
lecture.
very telling. Tell me about the title. Title is very
But
telling.
we touched on this on the last one. The
Yes.
title is telling is because it indicates one of the central doctrines of the Bayan, and that is Raj'at, which means return. And Fatima means is indicating Zarintoj Barakani, whose first name was Fatima, i.e. Tahira Quratul Ain.
That's right. And if you even take a closer look at Dr. Shariati's writing style, his writing style, you know, bears a, you know, very tight resemblance to that of the Bayanis, right?
Mm-hmm.
To that of the Bayanis. For instance, his humor, you know, his humorous writing style, you know, mocking on, you know, for instance, having on a mocking on, you know, the Baha'is, you know, and we know from the testimonies of his pupils and his, you know, students, he was, although he was a pluralist guy, he was, you know, uh, he was tolerating, you know, everybody, but he couldn't be that much. He couldn't be that tolerating, you know, towards the Baha'i, you know, because once, according to Dr. Iraj Saghiri, said that, you know, going through the Baha'i stuff is a waste of time, you know, or even mocked, you know, Farhang Holakui, you know. He sent one of his pupil, you know, by the name of uh, Dawood Mohajer. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Dawood Mohajer said also that Dr. Shariati first was hesitant to talk about it. He said, Doctor, I'm going to, you know, a fireside, right? And I need some piece of advice. I want to confront this guy, you know, claiming the Baha is a prophet, Baha is a saint, you know, he's not man, he's not individual, he's beyond mankind. And what's your take on it? And Dr. Shariati started filling the young boy in, you know, with some very firm and striking, you know, argument to be recalled and administered, you know, as a counterpunch to Farhang Holakui, you know. And the young boy went through that over victory, you know. So my question is, since Dr. Shariati was more or less, we know that, uh, actually struggling and quarreling with the Baha'is of the time, so it is not surprising that his activities, you know, come to the attention of Parviz Sabiti, you
Mm-hmm.
know, the deputy minister of Sabak. And Parviz Sabiti, maybe, you know, during his affiliation, during his allegiance to the Baha'i Mafia, managed to disappear him, you know, managed to set him up, even in England, you know. And it was kind of perfect murder, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And most important of all, Vahid, I've got this question. Nobody has ever been interviewed. No arrest was warranted. That's peculiar. That's peculiar. A homicide.
Because there, because very simple, because the hand of the British government is all over this.
Do you know that even the Scotland Yard, you know, sealed the document as a homicide that went cold. It was a homicide, you know, but they didn't follow it through, you know. And you are now telling me it's more, you know, it's more likely.
No. Look, if there is a hit by an ally of the British government happening, then the British government will cover it up. So even if Scotland Yard has opened a case,
yes,
that
declared it a suicide, yeah, homicide.
Well, it's like the situation with me in Germany with Roya. You know, the Bundeskriminalamt knows that Roya, that the narrative that the local Staatsanwaltschaft, the local district attorney's office is laying, is nonsense. That there are more holes in this narrative than one can count. Yet they don't have the thread, or they don't have the authority, because there's a higher power involved in not wanting to see this thing resolved. Yes, I know about the fact that Scotland Yard initially considered the death of Dr. Ali Sharat a homicide. Over the years, this has been turned into something else.
That is right. And my question now is, wait, when we want to profile the murderer or murderers, you know, or even those pulling the strings behind the scene, the first question that comes to mind, that pops on the desk, is who benefited from the death of Shariati?
Two forces. Number one, the Pahlavi royalists, and number two, the mullahs.
The mullahs, exactly.
And by by the mullahs, we don't mean just the conservative mullahs of the Hosea, but also those congregating around Ayatollah Khomeini at the time.
Precisely.
Because hold on, because had Dr. Ali Shariati lived, there would have been no Velayat al-Faqih in Iran. Period.
Exactly. And you know that according to his own, Ayatollah Khomeini's own, you know, interpreter and translator, you know, Ayatollah Mahmoud Duai.
Mm-hmm.
Mahmoud Duai said, I was really shocked and surprised, you know, because, and he said, I was kind of flabbergasted. He said, why? He answered, well, Ayatollah Khomeini was motionless, no remorse, no regret, and very hesitant to issue, you know, a letter of condolence, very hesitant. And when he was confronted, you know, last time even he was confronted by Duai himself, telling him, Agha, that was how the way they address Khomeini. Agha, Imam, would you care for some piece of advice? Would you take mine? He said, no, I'm not gonna take yours. He said, but Imam, Ayatollah Taleghani, even Mr. Hashemi Rafsanjani, even lots of other high-profile clerics in Iran, except for Ayatollah Beheshti and Sayyid Muhammad Tabatabai and Mutahari on top. Everybody's sending you, you know, their condolences, and it's gonna be out of control soon. You know, please do something. Please do something. You can't be more careless. You can't be, you know, you just can't get away. You just can't ignore them. You just can't neglect all these letters from the foes and friends. And Khomeini, and he's even, he suggested that he is, if Imam is reluctant to write, a 2-sentence, 3-sentence condolences, he said, what about it, Imam? I'm going to write it. I'm going to write it on your behalf and let it out on the outlet. He said, no, don't do that. I'll take care of it. And according to Douai, when he went again to Khomeini's place to pick it up, he said, wow, it came with another shock, a greater shock. I said, Imam, what are you doing? You said faqd. You said faqd, death. You didn't even said marhum, God bless him, for instance, or something that's very, very customary among the Muslims. The way you address him, is like you're talking about a kafir. You're talking about some infidel. You're talking about Dr. Shariati, the great Dr. Shariati. And he said, no. Enough is enough. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna issue a declaration, a condolence, condoning his deeds or covering up. Covering up is enough. Covering up is enough. I'm sick and tired of this father and son, because I surmise they were both Bobbies, and clandestinely, living under, a Muslim flag. They put on a mask, but they cannot fool me. I kept my silence for years and years, but now I can't. I just can't. No, that's enough. And the declaration, and as the declaration always shocked almost nearly everybody. Ranging from Arafat and Imam Musa Sadr, down to, a street guy, just a street guy, a protester, in the streets of Tehran or Mashhad, that Imam Khomeini even didn't bother to call Dr. Shariati a martyr or even marhum, rest in peace, God bless with him. And he said just faqd, the absence of Dr. Shariati. That was very embarrassing and awkward, was it not?
Well, it shows you that number one, Khomeini didn't like Shariati because obviously he considered Shariati a rival, and justifiably, because as I keep saying, had Dr. Shariati lived, an Iranian revolution would have taken a completely different direction than the one that the mullahs took it. And number two, when someone, Ayatollah, a marja of the stature of the late Ayatollah Khomeini, says fiqd rather than calling someone marhum, that means that he doesn't even consider this individual a Muslim. He considered this person something else. And we have the testimony of Bazargan, and we have the testimony of a few other people, that whenever the names of the Shariati father and son ever came up in the presence of Khomeini, that several times he was very unequivocal that he did not consider the Shariatis to be Muslims. Now, as we pointed out in the last episode of this, that there are many Islamic Marxists and many mullahs, including many maraji, would consider these individuals marhum, right? Those who have gone to the mercy of God. But Khomeini was adamant in not calling, in invoking the mercy of God on the Shariatis, which can only prove that he knew something. There is currently one person alive today that if this individual opened his mouth, besides Abdulkarim would actually blow up this story in the face of the Islamic Republic itself, and that would be Sayyid Hossein Nasr. Number one, because of Sayyid Hossein Nasr's own proximity to Savak and Parviz Sabati and that entire apparatus, 2, because of his proximity to the royal court. And number 3, because he was a confidant of Ayatollah Mutahhari, who knew the Shariati family intimately, and who, according to several very reliable sources in Iran today and elsewhere, had in detail intimated to Sayyid Hossein Nas the Azali Bābī, i.e. Bayani pedigree of Ali Shariati and his father Muhammad Taqi Shariati. Now, if Mr. Sayyid Hossein Nas wants to take this information with him to his grave, then he has to answer for it on the other side. However, if he comes clean and just basically recounts what he knows from the conversations between him and Ayatollah Mutahhari, this would go a long way into breaking the conspiracy of silence between some of these reactionary mullahs of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the very Ayatollah Khomeini and the forces that, according to his own words, he has decried since 1979, 1980, and also would set the record straight for posterity about what Dr. Shariati was really doing. We, the Bayani community, know that Dr. Ali Shariati was a believer. All of this has been known to us from the beginning. Even with someone who is tooled up and knows the writings of the Bayan, reads Dr. Shariati carefully, they cannot fail to miss the Bayani threads of his thought. But you know, when you have a conspiracy of silence that is participant with the mullahs of Iran, and also these liberal Islamist reformers of the caliber of Abdulkarim Soroush and that entire posse of individuals around them, were trying to keep this feature of Shariati's biography secret perpetually, there's a problem. Sayyid Hossein Nas can break this story wide open only by coming forward and recounting his reminiscence of the conversation, the personal conversations that he had with Ayatollah Mutahhari. Now, so far, Sayyid Hossein Nas has not done the right thing because he has made false accusations against Dr. Ali Shariati by calling him an agent of Savak. But we know that that is nonsense for a variety of reasons, given especially what happened at the end of his life. But if Hossein Nas came forth and you know, presented this feature of Dr. Ali Shariati's biography, this would resolve a huge conundrum for history, and also would also by the same token pull the rug from under the feet of these liberal Islamists of the caliber of that Abdulkarim Soroush and similar, because these people are just as much a problem today politically as the regime itself is, right? Because these people actually believe in Ayatollah Khomeini and the Velayat al-Faqih. This is the thing. The problem is not that these people disbelieve the Velayat al-Faqih. The problem with the types of Abdulkarim Soroush and similar is that they are believers in this system, whereas Dr. Ali Shariati stood against everything that the Velayat al-Faqih represents, right? So all of this propaganda that the regime over the last 40 years have fabricated about Dr. Ali Shariati being enamored with the Ayatollah Khomeini is a lot of baloney. All you have to read is to read his books, read his lectures, read his letters, all of which have been published. Some of them, unfortunately, had to have been concealed. A lot of these were published outside of Iran, and also a big section of the file of Savak relating to Dr. Ali Shariati to this very day remains classified. That means that for all the files that the Islamic Republic of Iran published on a whole medley of individuals, including many of its own founding figures, the file of Dr. Ali Shariati has been incompletely published. And the reason has to be asked. Why? Why is the Islamic Republic of Iran so reluctant to offer the world the full and complete unadulterated Savak file of Ali Shariati?
Well, because maybe he was reputed to perform, you know, Bayani rituals, you know.
Yes.
As you know that, I'm reading from you know, a passage from Mr. Mirdamadi's, you know, article. Goes like this, quote: "Nobody knows how Ali Shariati really found his martyrdom, but he was buried in Syria and was venerated as a saint."
Yes.
Okay, and his
by who? By who? But let's hold on a second. By who? Who organized that great funeral for Dr. Ali Sharat, the well-deserving funeral? Imam Musa al-Sad.
Yes.
And that means that Imam Musa al-Sad appreciated an element about Dr. Ali Shariati that the likes of the Ayatollah Khomeini and some of these black reactionary mullahs of Qom did not. So then that raises the question about the death and passing of Imam Musa al-Sad himself. The extremely suspicious disappearance of Imam Musa al-Sad in Libya in 1978, just on the eve of the ignition of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. When Khomeini suddenly becomes the most enigmatic, the most publicized figure in the press around the world. Right before that event, Imam Musa al-Sad disappears.
In response to a previous podcast, Mr. Mirdamadi and his amigo, Dr. Hossein Kamali, actually, to the best of my knowledge, went to Mahdouh Sanatizadeh, who is declared a non-Bayani.
Yeah.
And they told her that the trumped up stories of murder or martyrdom of Dr. Shariati by Savak or some intelligence service was common throughout Iran during the 70s and even much later. However,
wait a minute. So Hossein Kamali and Yasser Mirdamadi are now acting in the capacity of apologists for Savak in trying to dismiss any suspicions about the death of Dr. Ali Shariati.
Well, not necessarily. They just said the Scotland Yard made a mistake initially, to rule the death as homicide.
How would they know? But hold on a second. Wait a minute. How would Hossein Kamali and Yasser Mirdamadi know unless they have read the entire file related to Dr. Shariati? And if that is the case, on what basis have they been granted access to this file?
And we know that Scotland.
Wait. No. Exactly. That's it. Scotland Yard has never released. Let me repeat that. Scotland Yard has never released the file relating to the death of Dr. Shariati. Many people have tried over the years to get access to this file with no success. And this is one of the problems, is that until we get access to the full file of Scotland Yard around the death of Ali Shariati, the speculations of the likes of Hossein Kamali and Yasser Mirdamadi are nothing less than hubris and apologies for Savak. I mean, these people, these so-called Islamic liberals, these acolytes of Abdulkarim Soroush himself, whose entire narrative about how he ended up in the Southampton morgue, we are now establishing is a lot of baloney, right? That in itself, right, with these then people coming and saying the kind of things that they're saying is public, proves that there is an attempt, right, to completely skewer this entire story, to provide some kind of a cover narrative for Abdulkarim Soroush himself and his role in Southampton, when it is obvious that unless you were an agent of Savak, or you were or you have made that entire story up, that the account of Abdulkarim Soroush regarding what he saw, where he was in Southampton following the suspicious death of Abdulkarim Soroush, doesn't make any sense. Furthermore, there was no autopsy. And because there is no autopsy, this unreleased file of Scotland Yard is extremely apropos. So the speculations of the likes of Mr. Kamali and Mr. Yasser Mirdamadi have zero credibility, because two of them are doctors. Neither of them have ever had access to the unreleased file of Scotland Yard, right? Unless they are working for Scotland Yard and the British government. What?
Even toxicology reports never been published.
No toxicology report has been released. So the entire file of the post-mortem of Dr. Ali Shariati, not the autopsy because there wasn't one, but the post-mortem of Ali Shariati remains under lock and key. Now the question is, why is it under lock and key to this very day in England? Why is the British government reluctant to release the full file of the death of Dr. Shariati, which Scotland Yard itself was pursuing as a homicide at the time, and then all of a sudden closed the book on it, and the book has been closed without any further comment by the British government to this very moment since the late summer of 1977.
Yes, and one of Mr. Kamali and Mr. Mirdamadi's closest friend, Mrs. Sepide Kalantari, writes in PhD dissertation that Shariati had its own legend, and the alleged victim was buried, in Syria. Such stories do not rebound to the credit of Ali Shariati. Well, some fake news lasts only 3 years. Ancient clerics have not been the only ones that used fiction to cement cooperation. Unquote.
I will go one better than this. Here's the deal. Ali Shariati was not only a threat to the Shah's regime. Ali Shariati was also a threat, number one, to the mullahs, and particularly the Ayatollah Khomeini, and number two, Ali Shariati was a mortal threat to the Baha'i establishment. Had Ali Shariati lived, right, several things would have happened. Number one, the Iranian revolution would have taken a little bit longer to come to the ground. But even if it had been ignited in 1978, there is no way that Ayatollah Khomeini would have become the penultimate leader of that revolt. In fact, he would have had a serious rival in the figure of Dr. Ali Shariati, and eventually he would have been Dr. Ali Shariati would have been able to galvanize the entire secular left as well as the religious left behind himself, not only against the Shah but also against the entire reactionary class of these parasitic mullahs, the Ayatollah Khomeini himself included, because this was the goal. Hold on, because this was the goal of Ali Shariati, to basically break the back and eliminate and eviscerate and eradicate the class of Rohaniyun, the clergy, the black reactionary clergy of the Hawza, whether of Qom or Mashhad or elsewhere, and basically send these bastards packing outside of Iranian society forever, right?
Can you remember his letter to his father that this Islam is useless?
Yes, this is a letter that has now become a point of contention, but it is mentioned in the biography of that gentleman that you mentioned earlier, where he wrote a letter to his father that has been quoted at least once in this reputable biography, where Shariati basically says that the Islam that we have today, especially the Islam embodied by these mullahs and their crew, and the Islam, the cultural Islam of Iran at the time, is completely useless.
That's right.
And it has had its day, was his words that he had used, which is diction and code of the sort that the Bayanis themselves use, right? So now that you have had a sort of a partial confirmation, although not a complete confirmation, by the children of Dr. Ali Shariati about the possible Bayani Azali affiliation of their father and their grandfather, right? Now, right, we can actually now speculate about the reasons for the demise and the death of Dr. Ali Shariati. If Dr. Ali Shariati had lived, Iran would not have had an Islamic revolution. Iran would have moved very swiftly over the next decade of the 1980s into a Bayani revolution, because the devotees that Dr. Ali Shariati enjoyed in the figures of people like Chamran, Ayatollah Mahmoud Taliqani, and many of these people with both Marxist Leninist tendencies, but also with tendencies which the Bayan would be able to get immediately if he had revealed himself and his true affiliations and what his quest and what his aim ultimately was. All of these people would have become Bayanis. It is not outside of the realm of possibility that at a certain point of history, even a figure such as Ayatollah Mahmoud Taliqani would become a Bayani, or Chamran, right? But the powers that be, the people that actually orchestrated that fake revolution, which was actually a coup d'etat with Ayatollah Khomeini as its head, right, knew very well that as long as Ali Shariati lived, that he was a threat. He was a threat, so he had, and so they eliminated him. They liquidated Ali Shariati, and in England, of all places, the very same place that Shokri Effendi was liquidated by the same set of forces in 1957, 20 years before. They liquidated Dr. Ali Shariati because Ali Shariati was the linchpin. Had Ali Shariati lived, there would be no Velayat al-Faqih. There would be no penultimate leadership Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. There would be no interference of the mosque in the politics of a developing revolution in Iran. Iran would have developed into something much different, much more interesting, and something that could not be controlled by the West in the way that Iran was controlled. Something that wouldn't lead Iran and Iraq into a conflict like the oil companies orchestrated as a result of the takeover of Iran by Khomeini and the Islamists and these mullahs, right? It would have been something different. It doesn't mean that the imperialist powers wouldn't have looked at this Iran as a problem. They would have looked at that Iran as a bigger problem than the one that Khomeini took over. But there would be no Islamic fundamentalism today. There would be none of these forces that these monsters, these demons that have been infesting that region and the world for the last 40 years would have existed today. In fact, a revolution with the leadership of Dr. Ali Shariati would have put a permanent end to these forces. But as we know, through the activities of a shill such as Bernard Lewis, who was the architect of the demise of the Soviet Union, that was not the plan, because the Americans, the Israelis, and the Brits wanted to cultivate these sorts of forces, these Islamist forces. Number one, to eliminate the power of progressive left-wing forces, secular or religious, in that region. And number two, to use it and weaponize these sorts of fundamentalist Islamist forces against the Soviet Union, which they did successfully during the Afghan war and the Afghan quagmire that brought the Soviet Union down. But, we now are beginning to understand why Dr. Ali Shariati was such an important figure and why these forces that also included the Baha'is in the mix were involved in the murder and assassination of Dr. Ali Shariati. Because if Ali Shariati had ascended to power in Iran, the Baha'is would have been finished.
Yes.
Not just the Hosa and the mullahs, but the Baha'is together with the mullahs and the monarchists. These three forces would have been basically eradicated and liquidated out of the political scene of Iran for the betterment of Iran.
By the way, you and I have deciphered something pretty much thrilling about Dr. Shariati. And on this note, I'm going to talk about one of his, very well-known, writings called Hubut. Okay, called Hubut.
Yes.
Hubut, as you know, Hubut and Kabir. In the book Hubut, as you know, Hubut has a chapter. Kabir has a chapter called, the Genesis. Okay, the Genesis. It's called the Genesis, and he faked a name. He made up a name like Shando, But if you go deeply through, the whole chapter, you see that this prayer exactly, matched the, one of the Primal Poet's prayers, and everything suddenly fall into place.
Yeah,
Is that true?
Yes, that's true. It's and that's not the only one. There's several of these.
And maybe, as far as I remember, he borrowed stuff from Qayyum al-Asma, or if I'm not mistaken.
There are in a few of these existentialist type novel self-narratives. Yeah, there are echoes with a few of the surahs of the Qayyum al-Asma. That now, we should stop here because in the future, inshallah, I've already written up some notes. Now, one day, whether I do it or somebody else does it, the notes exist for a study of proving from the works of Dr. Ali Shariati himself his Bayani Azali Bābī pedigree.
And Zahid, do you agree? Alas, unfortunately, in Khomeini's empire, in Khomeini's regime, fame was often an invitation to disaster. You know.
Yes, because this guy Ayatollah Khomeini didn't like anyone's notoriety except his own.
And
You know,
isn't it surprising that you know, Khomeini actually per se, Khomeini, you know, a very uh, ancient, aged mullah, you know, displayed in public institution, and the image was quite surprising. Reflected him on as the father of the nation, you know, the father of the nation, and and you know, according to his cronies, the most brilliant propaganda technique will yield no success unless one fundamental principle is born in mind constantly. It must actually confine itself to a few points and repeat them over and over again, you know. And can any fake news peddler improve on that? You know, as you know, the Islamic Republic propaganda machine was equally agile, you know, with the truth. Rewriting the story, rewriting the history of everything from entire wars, you know, to individual photographs, you know, and that's kind of bizarre, you know, enshrining Khomeini or even enshrining Mutahari as the father of the nation and idealizing the you know, happy firm Islamic Republic, painting press and factories all over the country with Hashemi Rafsanjani's picture on the top. What to do now with the countless icons depicting the father of nation? You know, this father of nation, well, he was not really a fatherhood. You know, he didn't really care about being taken as a father. You know, and besides religious and ideologies, commercial firms too, you know, rely on fiction and fake news, right?
yeah.
Branding often, you know, involves retelling the same fictional story again and again. The Dr. Shariati, no, he just died as a, you know, due to a heart stroke, until people become convinced it is the truth. You know, what images come to mind when you think about?
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. The Islamic Republic of Iran since late 1979, particularly 1980, as it started to consolidate its own power, has gone out of its way to paint a fictional picture of Ali Shariati, who was enamored by Ayatollah Khomeini. Right? Now, we just went through the biography and the history where that proves that this is not the case. And anybody who's actually either lived in that era or read the works of Ali Shariati knows that that is as far away from reality as one can get, right? But the Islamic Republic of Iran and its propaganda machine doesn't care, right? They are more interested in how they can milk Ali Shariati. It's not about what Ali Shariati was at or whether this is true or not. They have constructed a propaganda narrative, and you cannot take it away from them unless the regime itself one day goes down. Now, my fear is that the day that the regime goes down, which it will eventually, is that they're going to try to take Ali Shariati down with them. And right now, you have the likes of these Islamic Greens and liberals of the type of Hossein Kamali, Abdulkarim Soroush, and Yasser Mirdamadi, who incidentally, we should remind everybody again, is actually a direct relative of Ayatollah Khamenei. These are the people who want to take Ali Shariati down. They're acting almost like PR agents for the Islamic Republic on its way down. Soroush, Kamali, and Mirdamadi, right? They know that the Islamic Republic's days are numbered. These people were the cadre of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Yasser Mirdamadi as a relative of the family of the ruling establishment, Ayatollah Khamenei. Hossein Kamali as a so-called minor public intellectual until he left Iran. And Abdulkarim Soroush as the enforcer of the Cultural Revolution of 1980 that destroyed countless lives when they tried to purge the universities and the education system of people that they deemed not Islamic enough. So now that the Islamic Republic is going down, they are determined to take Ali Shariati down with them. Although Ali Shariati galvanized the youth. Ali Shariati was not responsible for the revolution. Ali Shariati did not support the Vilayat al-Faqih. Ali Shariati was not there during the debates of the late 1979, during the Constituent Assembly that enshrined by force this ideology and this system on the Iranian people. Nevertheless, they don't care. Neither these Islamic liberals or the Islamic Republic of Iran. They are using Ali Shariati, and when their time comes that they are going to fall, they want to take Ali Shariati down with them. Nevertheless, that's all, these are things that we need to mention. The fact is that right now, we need to recap this because we've gone over the hour mark, is that the children of Dr. Shariati have implied, again, implicitly verified their father and their grandfather's possible Bayani affiliation.
And as we said in a previous podcast about Dr. Shariati, when Ustad Muhammad Shariati died, Khomeini never again bothered to issue any declaration or a statement or, sending his condolences, right?
Yeah. And there's another indication, whereas, he had no reason not to do that.
Because you know that according to historians like Ali Rahnama, partially the main reason behind the clerics disliking Ali Shariati was, his adamant and firm hatred towards, iconic Hausa clerics like Sheikh Abbas Qawmi or Allame Majlisi, never missed a chance to, tease them or mock them, and again, despite both father and son, exercise taqiyya, quite, aggressively, none of them missed the chance. None of them failed to mock, Allame Majlisi with condescending, statements about Allame Majlisi or how stupid this guy was, and for instance, the libel, his works, carries no liability. And this is the truth. This is the truth. Many people assume that if a particular religion or ideology misrepresents reality, its adherents are bound to discover it. According to Shariati, it's not true, because they will not be able to compete with more clear-sighted rivals. Well, that's just another, comforting myth. In practice, the power of so-called Hausa and Danishka cooperation depends on a delicate balance between truth and fiction, which cannot be compromised, which cannot be allied, which cannot be even juxtaposed, right? If you distort reality too much, it will indeed weaken you by making you act in an unrealistic way, particularly concerning Dr. Shariati.
That's right.
For instance, in 1979, a certain gentleman by the name of Fakhreddin Hijazi, who was just, wandering around Dr. Shariati. He was nobody. Out of the blue, claimed that Ayatollah Khomeini is blessed with possessing, with some striking esprit that linking into the hidden and occluded Imam, the new prophet, with a revolutionary message to the people of Iran, unite and then drive out the Iranians. To make the message more appealing, Fakhreddin Hijazi provided his followers with, something that's called Kool-Aid, that would allegedly, turn the Muslims against their own Marxist Muslims brother, thus began, some rebellion that was, mortally suppressed, by Islamic Republic. I believe some people like liberal reformists said, well, Shariati failed. Shariati failed for on the battlefield. On the other hand, you can't organize masses of people effectively without relying on some mythology. And if you stick to unalloyed reality, few people will follow you. And they said the mythology didn't, fill in, particularly with Islamic mythology, and without a thorough Islamic mythology, it would have been impossible to organize not just the failed masses and revolts, but also the far more successful rebellions of the, for instance, Muslims. In fact, false stories, have an intrinsic advantage over the truth when it comes to uniting people. If you want to gouge group loyalty, requiring people to believe in absurdity is far better test than asking them to believe the truth, right? If a big chief says, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, loyalty to the chief is not required in order to applaud him, right? But if the chief says the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, so is the case with Khomeini, only true royalists, will clap their hands. Similarly, if all, the youth, if all youth believe the same outrage tale, you can count on them to stand together in time of crisis. If they are willing to believe only accredited facts, what does that prove? Right? What does that really prove? You might argue that at least in some cases it is possible to organize people effectively, through, shall we say, consensual arguments, rather than thorough fictions and myths. And thus, in the economic sphere, as Dr. Shariati argued, money and corporation bind people together far more effectively than any god or holy book. Even though everyone knows that they are just, economic human convention. In the case of holy books, a true believer would say, according to Dr. Shariati, I believe that the book is sacred. While in the case of the dollar, a true believer would say that I believe that, and other people believe that $1 is valuable. It is obvious that the dollar is just a human creation, yet people all over the world respect it. If so, why can't humans abandon all myth and fiction and organize themselves on the basis of consensual conventions such as dollars, as Shariati, And he said such conventions, however, are not clearly distinct from fiction. The fiction induced by the mullahs. The difference between the mullah's fiction and money, for example, is far smaller than it may seem at first sight.
Or the fiction created by the USJ organization and the Baha'is about themselves.
Oh yes, tell me about it.
Yeah, that's a different conversation that we need to have at another time. We need to end this podcast right now because we've gone over the hour mark. Again, to recap for the last time, elements of the Bayani pedigree of both Muhammad Taqi Shariati and his son Ali Shariati have been implicitly confirmed by the children of Dr. Ali Shariati. So we'll leave it here. This issue will not go away. I will raise it again in other fora, and eventually we will probably break this threshold, and this will become a feature of the biography of Ali Shariati hopefully sometime in our lifetime.
And let me finish this session by, reciting some passage from Dr. Shariati, if you don't mind.
We've gone over the 1 hour mark. We can do this some other time. And also, you have an incoming call from Telegram that you need to take that keeps calling you back. So
yes, but it was just
let us, Kevin, let us leave it here, and then we will come back to this at a later time. Okay.
Okay.
لا حجة إلى أليا قبل نبيل.